Hello and welcome, everybody. Good morning. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Kat Flynn. I'm Director of Learning Science at SNHU Labs, and our team, my wonderful colleagues from Southern New Hampshire University, and I are here today to tell you all about our university's first foray into virtual reality and take you on a field trip to the future. So there's lots to discuss in the 40 minutes we have together. So we'll go ahead and launch right into things. At this moment, what I'll do is invite each of my colleagues to introduce themselves, share a little bit about their professional background and role on this project, where we designed, developed, and piloted a virtual reality experience custom to biopsychology course learning outcomes, and then say a little bit about their initial reaction when they heard that they would be participating in a virtual reality project. So Faby, take it away.
Thanks, Kat. Hey, everyone. My name is Faby Gagne. I'm the executive director of the labs. And I'm not going to lie to you, my initial reaction was excitement. I really was excited about the opportunity to rigorously examine the potential promise of virtual reality for future learners. But for you to really appreciate my excitement, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my background. So I have a PhD in experimental social psychology, and I earned my PhD back at McGill University. And in the 1990s, when I was a grad student, VR was really happening, more in the research context. And in our lab, we were using VR as a research tool. The research that we were exploring were defensive mechanisms in the context of marital relationships. And so we were using VR in order to display attractive alternatives to spouses in order to see whether or not they would engage in defensive mechanisms in the virtual reality space. We did this study in the old port of Montreal in the summer. It was beautiful, and we had a really hard time recruiting participants, mainly because they were tourists and pretty much intimidated by the technology. The VR technology that we were using at the time was called Cybermax. The company that made the headsets is no longer in business. But I was dealing with research participants who didn't even know how to use a computer mouse. And so imagine how complex it was to introduce them to VR and to using a joystick, and then to expose them to attractive alternatives in that virtual space. So needless to say, the results were a complete wash. Later on, some of my colleagues were able to rerun the experiment and were able to find pretty interesting findings. But what I learned there was that there's a lot to be learned on how to use the technology. So in my exploration, I went to the Game Expo out in DC. It was in January of 2019. I was there in order to exhibit one of the game-based assessments of problem solving that we had built in the lab. And the Game Expo is really exciting because what they do is that they invite area students, young learners, our future learners, to come in and to engage with educational technology. And so I spent 2 days sitting there and just watching young people engage in VR, and oh my, it was really, just really interesting to see them engage in that experience. But I was excited with cautious, my excitement was cautious.
Can I jump
right?
in, Faby?
Do you remember that, Seth?
Yeah. So hi everyone. My name is Seth Corrigan, Executive Director of R&D at SNHU Labs. My background is in psychometrics and measurement generally, but over the last 10 years or so, I've been looking to invest experiences such as simulations, games, and now VR experiences with the instrumentation that will allow us to make inferences about what people know and can do. And lately, yeah, even inferences about affect as they go through their learning experiences. So I had been excited about our possible VR work as well for just that reason. I thought, well, gosh, you could really put people in rich environments that would allow you to pose tough problems, learning-worthy problems, and force people to find new solutions, new ways of thinking, and actually new ways of moving their body in order to understand material in new ways. So I was really excited about that prospect, this idea of instrumenting these experiences to make these inferences. Along the way, I started to realize, well, gosh, we have the chance now to start investigating new learning theories in ways that we haven't been able to before. Example one, things like constructionism. Imagine being able to be placed in a new environment with sets of objects in front of you, engine components, for example, complex machinery, and actually building those things not just to learn the process of building them, but to learn the science behind them, how they work and why they work that way. That was exciting. But there were three things I was concerned about, and these are probably pretty typical concerns. Thing one was cost. We started talking to other universities across the country, and there were not available art assets for the VR experiences. So we ended up having to create all of that anew for ourselves. Thing two, impact. Can we really leverage this new technology in a way that was going to give us added boost beyond what you can get with typical materials? And then thing three was efficiency. In my experience with games and simulations, I had realized when you bring those technologies in the classroom, they are not time efficient when learners have the skills and the background knowledge they need. Because for those folks, you just hit a text in front of them, give them a lecture, and they're good to go. It's a lot of density there. But when we bring in VR experiences or games and simulations, that density starts to go away. And it takes more time to get the same content through. So those were three concerns I had, but there's a lot of excitement along the way.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
Oh. Hi, my name's Peter Frost, and I teach psychology at Southern New Hampshire University, and I was asked to submit some proposals for potential courses that would be a good match for VR. And I was so excited to hear biopsychology would be that match. I mean, I think it's, we heard at some other presentations that other universities are getting right into biology and the neurosciences. It makes sense in many ways because you have a three-dimensional construct, and it's hard to teach that in 2D, right? And to use words. And part of what we do is we have students, imagine you go into the VR space and you see a neuron, and you could scale that down to something that you can put in your hand or scale it up to something as big as a house. And you can control how it works, solve problems. And so what I was really excited about is our university is trying to reach all people. We're trying to reach people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as first-generation students, which we're finding less of on campus. And so we think this is a way to reach them. The research seems to show that if you can do something that gets them to, do something that's experiential, that you can have a self-paced, that can be really successful. So I certainly was looking forward to this project.
Yeah, to Peter's point, I'm Alan Mendonca, innovation analyst for the SNHU Labs team, and a lot of the work that I did was with user testing, the new experiences that we built, and as well as now doing some of the feasibility work. But one of the ththings I noticed when I was doing the user testing was that I had students that lasted 10 minutes in VR, and then I had students that lasted 45 minutes in VR. So if those that lasted 10 minutes, they just got overwhelmed with the technology. It was too much. There's visuals, there's audio, and that was something that just wasn't appealing to them. But how do we design a system and how do we design an experience that can meet, that will allow students to go at their own pace, to allow them to take breaks, allow them to just assess what they're learning, but also continue. And also for those students that lasted 45 minutes, how can we just keep them engaged throughout that entire experience? Those were some of my hesitations when we first started this work, and some things that I think we addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And just jumping off of your point, Alan, I was so excited when I heard I'd be part of this project. My academic background is in mind, brain, and education science, looking at the applications of the learning sciences to education. And my professional background is in instructional design, online instructional design specifically, and thinking about what makes a quality online learning experience. So being presented with this opportunity to contribute toward how we understand virtual reality as this canvas to create learning, to create assessment, I was so thrilled to be involved. My own experience in VR was pretty limited. I'd tried out some experiences on Google Cardboard, and I was really impressed, but to even go further and think about the 6 degrees of freedom and think about that expanded canvas for designing learning experiences upon. So thrilled. My chief hesitation was thinking about, this matter of access and thinking about with any new innovation, what are some potential barriers that could be created to our learners, and what can we do during R&D to think about those possible barriers? So thinking, and this was something we tried throughout the whole process, to think about those elements of universal design, thinking about sitting and standard experience options, thinking about presenting options of handedness, thinking about providing that transcript online, in line, right in the experience. So much to say. But that's our good segue into the design and development experience itself, and just thinking through, we were each bringing our own lenses to this experience, this process. Faby as a social psychologist, Peter as a professor of psychology, Seth as a measurement science expert, and Alan contributing that user research design lens. And thinking about, what are these debates that we came into as a team? Because I remember several debates along the way. And one big one for us was this question of balance. So if you're thinking about the VR experience overall, you have to think about how that's going to be used in context. So thinking about what goes into the virtual reality experience itself, the 3 experiences that are part of Synapse VR aligned to biopsychology course content, but thinking about what's going on in Peter's classroom to wrap around that. So maybe Faby, Seth, Peter, you guys can start to take us through that.
Well, I'm going to jump in right here and say that I gave Seth a hard time. It was really good intellectual friction, We really had really engaging conversations, leveraging what we both, knew, our different perspective, grounded in the learning sciences and social psychology, and also our own experiences as educators. And so I came from the perspective, and we both did, we both believed this, was that it would be very important to tie the learning experiences, any learning experiences, to our learners' past experiences. And also, we understood that critical reflection would be extremely important. Here, we, really took time to review the literature examining impact of VR on learning. And some of this literature shows that there's a danger that the experiences will be too stimulating, too engaging. And there's a danger there for heavy cognitive load. And if that happens, that's going to interfere with the learner's ability to think critically about the information that they're being exposed to. And so we wanted to be extremely thoughtful and to introduce opportunities for critical reflection in the task. But where Seth and I, kind of not disagreed, but where we had a lot of the conversation or discussion about was how much should we build in context into the experience so that the learner would be able to tie that to their own past experiences. And that's where we went back and forth.
Yeah, I think so. I had seen 2 different prongs to that conversation. One was, what are your expectations for the extent to which the experience is going to deliver the content? So are you building an experience that is going to deliver all of the content? Or are you building an experience that's going to partner in some fashion or work together with the in-class instruction? And so that was the first sort of, set of conversations, was to what extent is this thing going to be standalone? I take it out of the box and I get everything I need to know about neurotransmission, versus I get it out of the box and I get the building blocks that I need to have productive classroom sessions. That's one way of sort of framing it, I think. And then I think a second theme that came in through your observations and some of Peter's observations as well was watching people go through our experiences. So in these 3 experiences, folks actually build their own neurons, and they're actually responsible for figuring out how to get neurotransmission to occur. Well, the damn thing is that it's a really sexy environment. When young people get in there, they treat it like a game. And we started to realize just how much background knowledge and how much background expertise was required to approach the experience in a way that was going to be really productive for them as learners. Think about what you do with text. When I'm faced with a tough piece of text, I know I'm going to have to go back and read it again. I know I'm going to have to make notes. I'm going to have to pose questions to the text. These are all skills that we've learned over time, and these VR experiences are, I think, somewhat similar. And so, Alan, you saw people racing through these things.
Yeah, I would say not just students, but also when we demoed with our own staff and faculty, we saw that this was an environment that was very engaging. So the things that we've built, there was a great visual element to it. But yeah, we did see students that instead of taking time to reflect on the questions that we posed in there, they were, what is the next task? How can I just move faster throughout this? So we really had to take that time to slow them down. And I think this is where the role of the instructor is huge in that. Having an instructor just say hey, let's take a moment, let's go through these reflection questions, and if everyone's in that same time frame, I think that is, I think that's critical.
Yeah, definitely. It helped that Faby had recommended we have at the end of each segment of the VR experiences having some reflection questions. So we want to make sure that they make the connection conceptually. We also found that we were thinking about the sequence of the simulations. We actually teach them, or they can tinker with a neuron and see how it works in terms of biochemistry and all that kind of thing. And then by the 3rd simulation, they see why neural activity matters. They see how if you increase neural activity in a certain part of the brain, you see green as opposed to red, or you feel anxious versus maybe non-anxious or sad. And so that was a little bit challenging because they wouldn't get the full context until the 3rd simulation. But I think just by the sheer fact that they were solving problems early on engaged them because they're fully immersed and taking on the role of somebody who's trying to solve a problem, I believe.
Yeah, no, that's all really good food for thought, thinking about how to strike that right balance. Another area where I remember some debate was around how conversational versus how technical should we be in approaching this content. And who would care to offer their thoughts on that?
I think that was an interesting part of the conversation. In some ways that intersects with other conversations that are going on in other parts of the learning sciences. But for us, we wanted to build an experience that was, of course, approachable to our learners, folks that many of which have not had lots of success in traditional schooling environments. And so in that case, we wanted to use everyday language as much as we could. On the other hand, it's a disservice to not give folks the tough academic content that's going to really be leverageable later on in their degree. So I think that's one way that we had to kind of draw a line, use accessible language that also introduced them to the more academic terms. That's thing one. I think the same sort of theme showed up in design decisions that we ended up making. So when you go through our experience, it's visually very attractive. There is a lot to look at, as I think folks started to mention. And this led to some tougher conversations, I think, Peter, with you, myself, the larger design team, thinking, well, gosh, there may be cases where it's better to sort of bring down the volume, so to speak, on the visuals, make things a little bit less exciting so that we have better control over folks' attention, what they attend to in the experience. Because there's a tendency to want to say, gosh, let's make this thing as sexy as we can, as interesting as we can. Yes, agreed. But there are times when you really want people to focus on the content that you have in mind for them at those moments. And in that case, we need ways to do that. And if everything's interesting, it's really hard to dial in someone's attention correctly.
Yeah, and I think related to that was striking the right balance, where the learner would be introduced in a task where there's healthy, productive struggle, right? And also, typically when we think about learning experiences, they tend to be linear, starting from, an introduction and then maybe an activity and then maybe a conclusion. Here, we really wanted to emphasize, a learning experience that was a little bit more circular and that would create the opportunity for the learner to re-enter the experience and maybe to build upon new learning at every time they engage with the experience, because there is a healthy blend of, very accessible knowledge in the experience for someone who has absolutely no background in neuropsychology, but then it also incorporates, pretty substantial academic information that would help them pursue, the next step in related to biopsychology.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot happening there, right? Because the way I had come to see that experience as we designed it was there are really three key ideas. One is systems thinking. So when you're thinking about neurotransmission and neuroconduction, you're really thinking about a complex system. This based on number 2, ionic chemistry. So how is it that these ions actually make that process possible? And then thing 3 is the process itself. Now that's a heck of a lot to learn. And that's actually why we chose this particular modality, because we wanted something tough. We didn't want to use all of this technology. We didn't want to invest this much in something that was already pretty darn easy to teach. We wanted to take the tough stuff. And so what we're doing in that sort of 40-minute period is getting all 3 of those messages together. But you can imagine now the complexity of that. How are you going to get all 3 of those big strands of learning to happen in an environment where people can do what they want to do, essentially? So there's a lot of conversation about how much we put people on rails in that experience. Is it more like a roller coaster where we take you stop by stop, showing you each of these things that are happening? Or do we let you, as you said, go in a circular fashion, experience it once, build these things, play around with them, go back again, experience it again, things like that? I think those were tough decisions to make.
Yeah, and I found that the students, if they had direct access to the neuron and they could alter it, they were really excited about that. We did have some simulations where they had to use a tabulation and kind of indirectly influence, but they really enjoyed doing that. And what I found was, I thought for some of the more complex things, they could learn through VR first, and then I can supplement later. So it depended on the nature of what we were learning, but it was really exciting to see that you could take such a complex system and make it accessible to students. Yep.
And Kat, you really explored the feasibility of implementing this, in the classroom, helping Peter.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a bit about, what you found in terms of how to introduce more co-regulated learning?
Yes, absolutely. So just prior to the onset of the pandemic in the US, we had the opportunity to pilot 2 of the 3 Synapse VR experiences in Peter's biopsychology classroom. So we were able to try a couple of different things in terms of implementation and thinking about co-regulation of learning. So one of the first things we were able to do is have one of the VR experiences precede a lecture and the related content treated. And then the second thing we were able to do is have the lecture precede the VR content and just kind of see what was the general student reaction, because the focus of this pilot wasn't so much to understand the efficacy of VR as a teaching and learning tool. It was really to get our grips around what's the overall feasibility of VR for teaching and learning. That is, how motivated are students to use it? Do they find it acceptable? And does it help with maybe their motivation to learn? One of the things we tried in that wraparound learning approach, speaking to your question about co-regulation, was that we paired students up, had one student inside of VR, the other student, their partner, outside of VR. We equipped the student outside of VR with a guidebook that had a scene-by-scene breakdown. This was a paper document of what was going on in each scene to help them follow along. And there were also those reflection questions that were mentioned earlier by Faby baked in to help the students engage with one another, even though they were kind of seeing these different realities. And Alan,
Yeah. Well, I was just going to ask, I wonder if we would have gotten to that particular approach if we had had enough VR headsets.
Oh, that's also a good point. So thinking about the practicality of it all, right? So we had 10 VR headsets available, and Peter had a class of about 20 students. So we really wanted to learn about how to make the most of the equipment on hand and just really learn about VR implementation in as feasible or realistic a setting as possible.
And I remember that it was practicality, but also accessibility, because we understood that there might be learners who don't want to put on a headset and experience the virtual reality in the classroom. This allowed, the student who didn't want to experience virtuality to play the role of the guide uniquely.
But I think it was also collaborative. We wanted to figure out a way to get students working with each other. So I think that was an important piece as well.
But it did start to surface, and I know you're going to go, but it did start to surface some real puzzles about resources, number of headsets, setup time, takedown time, amount of space needed.
Yeah, and I think I'm just thinking about like the next phase of work that we're going to do, which is testing VR with some of our online learners. So shipping out headsets and just some of the resources that Seth mentioned. That's the resources that we created for the on-campus experience is things that we're carrying over to this online experience that we're trying to build. And the amount of resources that we had to build, it's crazy. So explainer videos, just to make sure that even if we're not there to support the students, that they're able to find how to set up their headsets or how to access the learning that we want them to get. I just think like we had to do a lot of that work. So.
I think there were some real problems that we had to solve that we hadn't been expecting. I mean, so number one, the number of headsets and the cost associated with it. And so here we are wanting to sort of start integrating or figuring out how to integrate VR in the classroom. And it cost a heck of a lot of money just to get the hardware together. And then thing two, I was thinking of my airplane seat on the right here. I've got about 3 square feet to deal with. Maybe in the classroom I've got something similar. But what did we do? What did we need in terms of square footage per person to make this whole thing happen in the classroom? Was it closer to 6?
Yeah, 6.5, I believe.
Yeah, so 36.
Yeah, and that couldn't be done in a traditional classroom. So we couldn't use just a regular sized classroom with desks and chairs to run this pilot. We had to use our upper dining hall, which was this big, large open space, in order to run this pilot, run this test. Yeah.
But the experiences were designed so that they could also be taken seated.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. But then I also think about all the chop wood, carry water work of organizing the headsets. Getting the room ready. I mean, do you have a sense of how much time you all spent on that?
Oh, just the setup time prior was probably about like 2 hours, and then just getting the headset set up, I'm just thinking about the work that we're doing now, just creating accounts and getting that all logged. Like there's not a good system in place right now for those headsets, and if there is, it's very expensive and something that we really haven't tested.
Yeah, definitely. And this is kind of a good summation of where we are in our current state as we look ahead to that online pilot. And Faby, did you want to say a little bit more about what's currently going on with that work?
Yeah, sure. But I think Alan, summarized it pretty well. So in this fall, we're going to be conducting a feasibility study. And so when we say feasibility study, we're not examining learning efficacy quite yet. We have so much to learn about how to implement this, especially with our online learners, who are mainly adult learners who come from, different backgrounds, various walks of life, and we're just not sure how it's going to be received. And so we're very excited. We're going to be the support team for these learners. We'll be, on call, making sure that we're available to help them troubleshoot. What we're also hoping to learn is really the promise of VR in terms of exploring new ways of engaging our learners. And this is a hypothesis. Online learning tends to be kind of solitary, and we know that we can use social VR in order to increase collaboration, and we aim on exploring that, on maybe connecting our adult learners with our campus students in the same learning experience. So for sure there's that.
Yeah, I know in the Department of Psychology, we're trying to set up a psychology lab where we can have online students collaborate with on-campus students. And I teach online during the summer, and in my class currently, I have somebody who's a Broadway actor, acts in NCIS, I guess you acted in that. And I have a student who's in a mental health, or actually involved with mental health clinics. I have another, not there as a patient, but helping to run it. And I have another student who's a nurse. I have all walks of life, different ethnicities. They have so much to offer our on-campus students. Our on-campus students are more tied in with research, and they are more in tune with how concepts relate to internships. So we're looking for ways, maybe VR is the way to do it, to have that maybe a creative space or a problem-solving space where we can have both get involved. So that's where we're at right now.
Excellent. And then just thinking about what's next and what's to come, what signals are we seeing on the horizon with virtual reality and teaching and learning for our students and faculty?
Yeah, if I can respond to that, from my part of the world, from the measurement and assessment side of the world, there are some really exciting possibilities there. And I suspect that folks are already working on these technologies. I know that we've begun building some of the components of them through other work that we're doing. But thing one is instrumenting these environments so that we can start making inferences about what people know and can do. Now, there's a way that stream of work stops at the measurement aspect. In other words, we use it to assess what you know and can do. We can use that in a formative way. We can use that in a summative way. But then think about integrating those experiences with both the assessment components and the instructional components so that the system is becoming more responsive to what you know and can do and is changing your experience to support your learning. Now, we see that already in online environments, games, simulations, and so on. So the path is somewhat worn there. I think we still have a lot to learn, but there are tools and processes there. Thing two, modalities. So I think if you look at typical assessment technologies, you're filling in the bubble and you're writing essays. But it should be the case that we can use information about the processes you engage in new environments, both to learn and as ways of exhibiting what you already know. So I'm very excited about the possibility of not just building VR experiences that are helpful for learning, where issues of scale or expense are key, but also building them to make people's environments more responsive to their needs. That's really exciting. And then keep pushing things further. So we can gather information about how you interact with the environment, that's thing one. We can gather information about how you solve problems, that's thing two. But now think about other types of communication modalities. So speech. In other projects we have as a team, we're now looking at paralinguistic aspects of speech as well as linguistic content.
Can you explain the difference between paralinguistic?
Yeah,
and
sure thing. So think about your tone, prosody, volume, these sorts of things. For us, they're indicators of how someone's doing, how they're feeling, anxiety, excitement, and so on. So when you start thinking about collaborative VR, we should be able to gather the kinds of information we need to make inferences about how you're conducting yourself in that environment through paralinguistic signals. But the other aspect, too, is the linguistic content, so what you're actually saying, what you're actually communicating, the messages. That's work that we're doing on that's funded by Google Foundation and Hewlett Foundations right now. We've built out a pipeline that allows us to gather both sets of information, the audio signal as well as the linguistic content. And then we're creating machine learned models that allow us to gather or identify the features and make inferences about someone's speech and what they're trying to get done in those interactions. So that's really exciting too, I think. And then the last piece, and I'm sorry to go on so long and I'll pass it on to you, but the last piece is, and I mentioned this before, but the learning sciences is rich with different theories of learning. What has predominated so far has been information processing. But when we start to give people rich tools to work with, and those tools are instrumented in ways that allow us to make inferences and observe what they're doing with them at a distance, all kinds of new possibilities open up for the kinds of learning theories we can engage with. And I mentioned one before, which was constructionism. Constructivism is one piece that's well known. Constructionism, actually having people build, create, with new tools, new components in ways that teach them the content. And that's something that I think is novel about VR and what it offers us.
Yeah, that's something that in the user testing that we did, we really asked students what do you want to do in this space? And that is building VR and building things in VR is huge. And I just think about the world of 2030. That's really what our team is focused on, and just like the learners of tomorrow. These students are going to have they're going to have an expectation of VR and AR and just like the learning tools that we build. So these students are used to using their phone to play Pokemon Go and just all these things that have AR systems built into it. And just thinking about those students in 2030, they're the students that are going to come to our university and really expect that kind of learning. So how do we build that future for them, and how do we make sure that we're prepared, and how do we prepare the university for that future?
Totally. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Faby.
Yes, I'm going to seize the opportunity, and talk about a single. How many of you were at Todd Rose's presentation today? It was fascinating. The idea of collective illusion, to me, is a very strong signal. I was kind of like awestruck by the fact that, my views of the collective are probably biased and probably influenced by external factors that I'm unaware of, and I'm not projecting my own beliefs onto that collective. And so he spoke about the zero-sum, dilemma, right? Where most of us think that most individuals, are in it to win, right? It's a zero-sum game. And myself, and I think like most of us here on this panel, believe that, to be truly innovative, it will require a lot of inter-collaboration. I'd like to, to make a call for increased, open innovation, for folks, like us to work with, many of you in order to really, come together and understand how to move forward and change higher ed so that it's.
Oh, I was just going to say, Kat and I, when we published an article about the VR work we've been doing, and one of the first comments we received, somebody asked, well, can we have access to what you've created? And I think the big question going forward for universities, although it is a current issue as well, some have just figured it out, but is it proprietary? Is it something that's open access to other universities, to high schools? And also the smaller schools, I've had the benefit, some of my colleagues are kind of jealous to find out that I have an R&D group that I'm working with to create my own VR to match my own outcomes for a course. A lot of smaller colleges don't have that, and so smaller colleges might need to band together to pool their resources, but if we make it more open, maybe that won't be as much of an issue.
There are puzzles to be solved, though, because the experiences do collect data about learners. And so until, we really understand, right, what we need to set, policies and standards surrounding learner privacy and giving them, information in the right way, it's a little bit tough. So there are, like, a lot of problems to be solved in terms of how we can share some of these experiences in an open nature.
Absolutely, and we're heading into the final 2 minutes of this panel, and as we wind down, I also wanted to make sure Alan and Seth had the opportunity to share any parting thoughts they had as well.
No, you can go first.
Yeah, I guess if I could just sort of summarize across the experience quickly, and going back to the original question that we had started with, which was, hesitations at the beginning, and then thinking about what were the hesitations that showed up along the way. I think for folks looking to bring VR into the physical classroom, there are many unforeseen problems to solve. You may be aware of many of them so far, and hopefully we've exposed you to some of them here. On the design side, another slew of puzzles to solve. And then on implementation side, in terms of just organizing things, a third set. Switching up a level to the field, and the set of conversations we had early on with other universities, in particular their library systems, asking folks, are there existing libraries of assets? And the answer then, that was about 2 years ago, was a resounding no. And people were just starting to think about that. And so there's a real need now, if we're really serious about driving down costs of producing these experiences, for these types of asset libraries. Libraries that we can tap into and not have to design things anew each time. Now, I bet there are folks that are starting to work on that already, and I'm just not aware of it. But that's a real issue, I think. There's lots more, but we're almost out of time, so I'm happy to start closing, Kat. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I am so thankful to have been on this journey with all of you working on this project. I look forward to what's next, and we're very grateful to you all for joining us today and going along on this little field trip with us. So thank you very much, everyone. Take care.